everyone. This is the AetherCon panels through the Fest Hall, our Philosopher's Conundrum panels. This is going to be the last panel for Saturday, the 17th. This is going to be Miniatures Getting Bigger. Tonight joining us, we have Brian Stiltz of Reaper Miniatures, and we have Sean K. Reynolds of Paizo. And as far as the current panel goes, I would like both of you to introduce yourselves, give the audience a little bit more information in regards to what it is you do.
You first, Brian.
Oh, thank you very much. So I'm Brian Stiltz. I'm the production manager at Reaper Miniatures. I've worked there for about 11 years now, closely involved in the manufacturing and production processes, shipping, order fulfillment, things like that. And in the last 3 years, I've become more and more involved in the front end process, getting closer involved with our art director, and a huge involvement with the Kickstarter that we just finished. So I know a few secrets about where Reaper's going to be headed in the next few years and things like that.
And I am a designer-developer at Paizo Publishing, working on the Pathfinder RPG. I've been a big miniatures fan since the 90s, and I love painting and modifying them and just picking up weird, quirky minis, and I'm a big fan of Reaper 2, and looking forward to how technology allows us to do stuff like pre-painteds and Reaper's bones and all the stuff that we're going to talk about in the next hour.
Exactly. And as far as that goes, the Kickstarter for Reaper there, we've gotten word that that has reached at least 1,800 orders. How's that handling on 18,000? There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. My apologies.
It's okay.
But definitely, how's that been for you guys on the production end of things? Has that been a considerable amount to take?
It has. It's turned into very nearly a full-time job just to sit and manage the after effects of the Kickstarter, to sit and plan where we're going to store all the product, how we're going to do it, and then of course one of the things we're doing with the Kickstarter is we're bringing production of the plastics to our factory. So there's a lot of, where in the building are we going to put it? Okay, let's get everything that used to be over here, and of course nothing's there for no good reason. It's always there for a reason. So when you move it, you have to reorganize pretty much everything else too. And that's been quite an interesting process. It wasn't something I expected when the Kickstarter was going on, that we'd be spending the next 3 months where every day we're still having Kickstarter meetings after the fact, going, okay, where's production at in our factory in China? Where is delivery on the new equipment at? Where are we on? We're having an addition built to our factory to have additional space for the new equipment. So where's the construction on that going? Where's the production on the 14,000 Sophie miniatures I have to produce and ship and have shipped before Thanksgiving, which is 4 days away, kind of thing. So there's a lot going on.
That's exciting. You actually had to add in a new facility for the Kickstarter products alone, or was this intended for quite a while?
It was not something that I think we had planned during the Kickstarter. It was something that as we got going, after the smoke cleared, and we said, okay, this is what we've raised, this is what we're going to do, this is what we need to do to be able to bring production in. We realized that we need several thousand more square feet. I'm not entirely sure how much, but we turned around and we said, okay, we're just going to have to expand the building. And temporarily, we've rented out a second facility in the an adjacent building to us in the same development. But that's not for us. We don't believe it's a good ongoing solution. So we're going to make use of that for storage. If it gives you any idea, just the figure cases that we promised as part of the Kickstarter that you could pick up as an option, those figure cases take up more square footage than I actually have in the factory. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting and we're expecting the Bones figures themselves to take anywhere from 8 to 12 truckloads, full semi-tractor trailer loads.
Okay, all I can say is simply wow in regards to that. That is quite the undertaking there.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for Brian. Brian, do you think the additional stuff that you're building for your warehouse is going to be ready in time for ReaperCon next year?
I think the new facility will be, and I believe the plastics will be in place so that we can show that as part of the tour on the factory from that point forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Because just to let people know, if you have the opportunity to go to ReaperCon, it's actually where they make the miniatures, and it's really, really interesting. One, you get to see right where they're doing the spinning of the pewter miniatures. You get to hang out with their sculptors and their painters and just tour the facility and take painting classes and just do some gaming and hang out with some really neat people. We had a really good time when we did ReaperCon last year, and definitely recommend that people should check it out, take the chance.
Thank you very much for the plug.
Definitely. And as far as that goes, once the current Kickstarter material, as much as it is put away, are you guys considering doing further projects using the Kickstarter platform?
Yeah, it's something we've looked at. Right now, we don't have anything concrete or definite, and one of the reasons for that is if we sit down and we go, hey, we could do a Kickstarter for this, and Ed does a great job of looking at us and going, we're not going to start a second project until we finish the first. And that even boils down to until delivery of the first project is completed, and we've guaranteed to all of our customers that they've all got everything that we told them they were going to get. We're not even going to sit down and have a planning meeting to organize what the next thing is. So, I think all of us that were involved in it, everybody has a notepad full of ideas that we would like to see. These are things that like I've always wanted a painting DVD. But we don't have a video studio capable of that kind of thing. And I thought, well, cameras aren't that expensive, and the time's not that much for maybe as little as $5,000 we could do it. And then I don't know how much the equipment is, so that'll add a little bit of cost and so on. So, but you look at this little tiny project and go, we could have a painting DVD. And I go, Ed, we could do a painting DVD. And Ed goes, that's for discussion after. We deliver this first. And he's right. This is such a huge project that there's no way I want to start planning Project 2 in the middle of this.
Definitely understandable. Definitely. Since we are on the topic of just miniatures in general, possibly we could go into a discussion of something I've always been curious about myself is how other players see the issue of theater of mind versus miniatures. Since you do have players who have been playing since the 70s that really didn't have miniatures at the time, and the miniatures, say, Ral Partha or Grenader Heritage, those came a little bit later after the original D&D box sets. Mm-hmm. How did you guys start out as far as playing? Did you do everything theater of mind, no miniatures on table, or did you use the first products that came out, or was it just kind of whatever you could pick up and find?
I'll go ahead and let Sean take this one to start.
Okay. Back in high school, my group didn't use minis at all. I had picked up some and tried painting them myself and was not successful just because I wasn't bothering to ask anybody for help, and they turned out really silly looking. And the rest of my group wasn't really into it. I didn't really start painting miniatures and start using them in gaming until I started gaming with Monty Cook, because he is a big miniatures fanatic, and he has just a huge collection in a glass case, and he brings out crazy things and action figures and all sorts of modified stuff that he uses for his games. But when I was younger, we were just, occasionally drawing rooms on a large pad of paper and just kind of marking X's where we were. And it wasn't really that I started using miniatures until I was professional in the industry.
And I think in my high school and college days, I can't remember ever using miniatures at that time. And it wasn't until I was out of college, my wife and I had our own kids, and we were having gaming groups come over to the house. And the local gaming store that we went to had a wall of minis, and it always had a wall of minis. We'd never really paid any attention to them. One day we went, hey, that looks just like your character. And my wife went, oh my God, that is my character. And she bought it, and it was I want to say it was a Ral Partha female rogue. And we brought, I think I found one for my character, and we went ahead and picked up minis for everybody. And then we went home, and everybody was really excited when the next game was, oh my God, we had minis, and we realized we had no monsters. So my wife went online, and this was 95, 96, so going online was the huge spooky endeavor back then. You had dial-up and everything. But my wife went online and found some website where they sold minis, and a week later we had a box of 100 Reaper minis in it because they were the only people that were doing monsters. And before long I had 14 million miniatures, and it was disgusting. And I had to get a job there.
Now, how did you get into being the production manager at Reaper?
I started working there in the shipping department. I was doing the order fulfillment. We placed an online order. I was the guy whose job it was to find the product and do it. And just over the course of the next 7 years, I worked my way up through the packaging departments, casting departments, graphics and layout. I worked very closely with the production manager at the time, to the point where when he would go away to a convention, he would leave the shop in my hands so that he knew that I was capable. And when he finally moved on, it just fell to me. He said I was the only person, that really had, and it's a small company. There's a little over 24 of us. I think there's 26 people in the entire shop. So it's not like there's millions and millions of people to choose from, But we're a small family unit, and we really fit in well together. And I think I picked up those skills along the way.
Awesome. And since I've asked Brian this question, Sean, how did you come across Paizo in particular, or Paizo, I mean?
Well, I have worked with many different people at Paizo in previous companies. I worked for Lisa Stevens, who's the CEO and owner of Paizo. I worked for her when we were both at Wizards of the Coast on Team Greyhawk. Eric Mona, who's now the publisher at Paizo, used to work for me as a TSR chat and message board host on AOL. And I ended up getting a job at Paizo when I was laid off from Upper Deck, and I dropped Eric an email saying, hey, I'm going to need some more freelance because they just got laid off. And Eric said, we actually have a job that you could totally do, so come move out here to Washington again. And I did. So, short story.
Sounds good. And you're more of the game writing guy, so I'm going to ask you this question. In regards of Pathfinder itself, 3rd edition did bring in more kind of a grid-based system for miniature play in particular. That was kind of amplified by WotC's 4th edition. Does Pathfinder, in your opinion, allow for that same type of grid style as far as 3rd editions went? Does the do the miniatures come into play you playing Pathfinder as, say, they would in 3rd edition versus a earlier 2nd or 1st edition style of play?
Definitely. I mean, Pathfinder is very much based on 3.5 D&D, and so that use of the grid to manage combat and stuff is a critical element of the game. You can play without miniatures, obviously. You can use tokens or whatever, and you can play without a grid, although it just requires you to stop using certain aspects of the system, like attacks opportunity. You kind of hand wave distances, like how far can my character go. And there are people who play that way still, and that's totally fine. But the assumption is that Pathfinder, you're going to have some sort of tabletop where you can look at a representation of where your characters are, and you can use the rules to estimate how far you can travel. And part of it is that the game rules put the control back in the hands of the... Oh, my cats are fighting. They put the control back in the hands of the PC so that the GM doesn't have to spend so much time saying, yes, you can travel that far because it's 25 feet. Oh, you were 26 feet away last turn, that sort of thing. So by making the grid almost not necessarily required, but it definitely facilitates making that happen. It does encourage people to use that sort of setup for their gaming.
Okay. And with my experience with Pathfinder, I've found that generally to be the same experience. It is a lot easier to track attacks of opportunity with the grid system. Trying to do that theater of mind does not generally work as well as would be hoped. it definitely is a shift from, say, playing a first edition D&D game versus Pathfinder. As far as other games in the industry, how do you think Pathfinder handles that type of combat with miniatures versus, say, the leading competitor?
Well, Pathfinder is based on 3.5 D&D, and D&D grew out of a tactical miniatures war game. So obviously there is a strong legacy of this is my guy on the table, and I want to move him this many inches. I mean, in first edition D&D, movement was based on inches, tabletop inches, and spells were 10 inches range, and you could shoot your bow 6 inches and all that sort of stuff. So clearly that origin is there. There are so many other games that don't have. This is my cat's tail. Hello. There are so many other games out there that don't turn combat into a realistic simulation of what your character can do. Like so much stuff like in playing Vampire or even in Nomine or a lot of different simpler games, it doesn't matter where your character is because you don't have to deal with tactical positioning like, oh, am I behind him? Am I flanking? Do I get +2 from this? If I move to here, is it get an extra attack? It's just, it's about 100% about the story, and combat is more incidental to what's going on in the game. Like my friend Hiram Savage likes to describe. I can't remember the game now. I want to say it's Everwhere, but I don't think that's it. But like he kind of breaks the mold of what people who are used to D&D style games are used to playing with, and then he says, okay, your characters have just defeated the evil priest and destroyed all the cultists, and you march out of the pyramid where the cultists were, and you see an army massing to attack you, and the players go, oh, okay, I attack them. And then Hiram says, all right, you defeat the army. What do you do next? And it's just an entirely just brain-shattering paradigm shift of, oh, I don't actually have to roll all my individual attacks and deal with all these guys because it's not about the nitpicking of what happens in this 6-second increment. It's what's going on with the campaign. So Pathfinder and D&D are much more strongly linked to miniatures, and that's okay with me because I like miniatures and I like that sort of incremental ability, but I also appreciate other games where it's a lot more abstract.
Sounds good. And since I just have to ask this one personally, have either of you two ever played Chainmail, which was the original game that D&D was derived from, the medieval-style combat game?
No, I've never played Chainmail or the 2000-era re-release of Chainmail that WotC did, although I did buy a lot of the 2000-era Chainmail figures for use in my D&D games.
I have a copy of the Chainmail rules, but I've never actually played it. It's weird because I'm a big fan of gaming, but and of miniatures, but I'm not really into miniatures games. So I have a lot of miniatures from different companies, and it's like, oh, this is for our game. I'm like, whatever, it's got hit points. I'm going to put it in my game. So I own the Chainmail rules. I've read them. I played the Wizards of the Coast reboot of Chainmail with all the new miniatures, and I was one of the early playtesters for that. But it's not normally what I do when I'm sitting down to game.
And I'm going to echo Sean on that one a little bit. Oddly enough, working for Reaper Miniatures, miniature war games is not really my forte. It really is much more the role-playing game and the hobby modeling aspect of it for me. I've played Games Workshop. I've played War Machine. I've played Reaper's own game, Warlord, and Cav. But in the end, when I go buy a mini, it's almost always because I need that character for my one of my 3 weekly Pathfinder games. So.
Or on the flip side of that is, wow, this would make a really cool NPC or monster to put in my game. I have to get it.
Right.
Indeed. Okay. I do have a question from the audience panel currently. Has there been any consideration for articulated miniatures? So maybe along the lines of, say, an action figure, I assume this question is asking in regards to with Patuer miniatures.
I think that's a good question.
Wow. It's not something that I can say that we've given a whole lot of thought to. It's something I know that the bones material, and certainly that could be done. I'm not sure whether that's a viable option in pewter. Pewter is a tin alloy, and tin is a very, very soft metal. And so I think we'd end up with, after 2 or 3 flexes along the join, even were it a standard axle, peg, and hole kind of configuration, that would warp out of shape very, very quickly, and I don't think it would be viable. It might be something we could do with the plastics line, but at this point, we're still more trying to get our existing models into the plastics, because that's something that's affordable. A figure that's $8 in tin can be $2.50 in plastic, and that's something that's very important to us as gamers ourselves on a budget, that I don't want to flood the world with $20 figures. And if articulating the arms and legs, or even just one joint so that your sword can be up or down to reflect whether or not you're in combat, if that's going to increase the cost of the Mini even by 50 cents, I'm not sure that that's a direction I want to go. So it's something we can look at, but I'm just not sure about that.
Now, there are some action figure lines that are like the little 2-inch, I'm bringing my hand up to the webcam, like 2 inches tall, and they're articulated, a lot of like the Halo sets, and about that scale. They're bigger than miniatures, but they do have that articulation. Of course, they also have the convenience that they're making probably 100,000 units, and so the per unit cost is pretty small. But there are a lot of people who like modding action figures and other toys into different things, and if people really want to get like that sort of articulation now, I would look into getting some of those action figures and get some sculpting material and repaint them.
Or at 28 millimeter scale, Lego minifigs are just the right size. Now, they're horrifically out of proportion, but they're pre-articulated. So
sounds good. I know I've had a couple of those stand in when I needed minis at the most. Now, since the panel name is Miniatures Getting Bigger, Reaper does seem to be expanding. How do you see the market as a whole expanding for Ptur miniatures and miniature gaming in general?
It's been a really shaky 4 years. The company's actually done very well for the last 4 years, but I think the industry as a whole, I know Paizo's done very well by all reports as well. But I hear from a lot of game stores that they're struggling, whether it's the general economy or the internet. But we continue to do strong. Business continues to grow. Our sales continue to get bigger. Our Kickstarter obviously was absolutely massive a couple of months ago. And when we go to a convention, our response continues to be larger and larger. So I think that it's doing great. I think that the biggest thing that's going to hurt the miniatures industry as a whole is the price of tin for us. I want to say it's tripled in the last 10 years, and that has led to most companies. I mean, when I started, I think our average miniature was $3.99, and now it's $6.99 to $7.99. And that kind of doubling in price is not something that we can sustain every 10 years or even every 5 years. I think eventually pewter miniatures are going to be more of a boutique market than the mainstream, or right now it's kind of the mainstream, although the pre-painted plastics are definitely doing very well. But I think the price of tin as a commodity is really hurting the industry as a whole, I think.
I think that also in general, similar to how the RPG publishing industry has been experiencing an explosion in the past 5 years, people doing a lot of self-publishing, because you get a copy of something like Adobe InDesign and you can make your own PDF and sell that on places like RPG Now and Paizo.com and that sort of thing. In the same way, the availability of easy sculpting materials like green stuff. You go to an art store, there's probably like 10 different sculpting materials that you can make stuff with. That means that people can just start making their own miniatures, and if you get a spin caster, then some tiny company that's just 2 guys in a basement can start cranking out some really neat, unique miniatures that haven't been seen before. And you get a lot of companies like in France or Spain that are not really known for doing miniatures, and all of a sudden they've got these crazy things like Hell Diablo, which are these like gigantic size but super detailed, crazy hellscape miniatures of weird demons.
Oh, those are ridiculously cool figures too.
Yes. And it's just like, there are people who have an entirely different artistic background and cultural background. It means that they project that sort of background into their work, and so they don't have the New World American style of art. And it just means that we have the opportunity to see some really cool sculpts coming out of tiny little companies. And some of these people are just doing them because it's fun. Some people are doing Kickstarters so they can get an entire line made or a bunch of starting units for a miniatures game. And I just think the available opportunities that people have now in terms of technology, like for 3D printing, companies like Shapeways, they can make miniatures and people can design miniature in 3D. They don't have to have any knowledge of physical sculpting and have their miniature produced. It's really awesome.
Exactly. And we did receive a question from the audience in regards of 3D printing. What do you think about the advent of 3D printers and what people can do at home using that technology?
We have been... Oh, no, go ahead. Continue.
Oh, you continue. My apologies.
We have been using 3D printing technology for at least as long as I've been at Reaper, mostly with our CAV line, which is a 1/72nd scale mechas and tanks and planes. And we use the 3D printing because it's a lot easier to get really impressive mechanical-looking stuff off the 3D printer through the computer modeling than it is by hand. It's not that a sculptor can't do it by hand, but most of our sculptors would much rather just model it and go. Our experience with trying to do a more organic shape, like your archetypical elven fighter or with a long flowy cape and a bow and flowing blonde hair, has shown us that at this time the resolution on most commercially available printers that are what I would say a reasonable price just isn't there. You can't quite get the eyes and the face and the fingers to come out quite right, and you get too much striation between layers currently. In the next 5 years, we could see another quantum leap in this technology, and all of a sudden everybody has a 3D printer at their house. And when that happens, I'm more than happy to start producing 3D miniature designs that you can buy the design from Reaper and print it out yourself instead of me having to make the miniature. So we're excited. We think that can bring a lot of things in. We've tried to stay at the forefront of what that can do for us, and I know that every year we send off a new design, and it's not always the same design. A couple of years it has been, but we send off a new design every year to our 3D guy and go, here, try this, and they'll always send it back. And up till now, we've always gone, well, we can't quite produce that yet, but it's been getting better and better by leaps and bounds.
Actually, related to the 3D printing, that kind of points back at the earlier question about posable miniatures, because if we have the technology to create a 3D model of a character, and you can customize that, and you say, you know what, I want to have my character with his arm up in the air as opposed to down by his side. That really allows a lot of variability in what you want to do. Now, it's not literally like I'm going to move my miniature's arm up and down, but you could have multiple poses of the same character, create your own dynamic pose based on your character. It's nice living in the future.
Definitely. My apologies here. It does seem like I'm experiencing a slight delay in my connection speed here.
It's because I'm in the future.
No worries. No worries. Okay. Now, going on with the advent of 3D printing, do you see plastic becoming more of a viable option as far as Reaper's plans into the future? Is there going to become a point when tin might possibly be too much to be worth making miniatures out of, and we'd have to go explore new venues for making miniatures? Or do you think tin will still, though it might become a bit overpriced during the current recession, still be the constant standard for miniatures?
Well, I do see plastic as becoming more important to our business model. We launched our first plastic miniature back in 2007 with our Legendary Encounters line, and that made a reasonably large splash, but we were never quite able. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on that I'm not sure this is the correct panel to get into, that we were never really able to carry that line as strongly as we'd hoped we could. And Bones, the Kickstarter, has given us the chance to do so much more with that, and now the Bones line, by the end of March of next year, will have well over 300 figures in it, and that is a line where now its own income generates the money we need to be able to continue to grow and develop that line. So I see plastic as something that we're definitely going to become more invested in, especially once we're done with what we need to do to the building to get the plastics up and running in our own shop. And now I'm no longer farming that out to somebody else to do, because the logistics of that have driven me just absolutely crazy for the last 5 years since we introduced plastics. But as far as tin, I really do genuinely hope we never get rid of tin and pewter miniatures. There's something really nice about the heft of a pewter mini. It's got a good hand feel. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now. When you pick it up, it just feels solid, and it's got substance. And I like the plastic figures. I use pre-painted plastics. I use Reaper metal figures. I use Bones figures. I've been making extensive use of the prototypes that China has been sending us of our Kickstarter figures. But the metal figures just, they have this, I don't know, I'm not sure how to describe it. They just feel great when you're in your hand and you're handling them and you're painting them and you're playing with them. And so for a lot of those reasons, I really hope that the metal never really does go away. The metal also has a secondary benefit. A metal mold, which we make out of rubber for a metal miniature, cost me between $75 and $150 to make one mold, whereas a plastic mold costs me between $10,000 and $20,000 to make one mold. So I think for that reason alone, the metal's never really going to go away, no matter how expensive the figure gets. If I've got an untested concept, I got something I don't know. Reaper just did a whole bunch of Sharkmen. I don't know how Sharkmen are going to go over, but for $100, I can find out. And if the public doesn't like the Sharkmen, I can melt them all down, and then I'm not even really out the cost of the metal. I'm just out some labor and $100 for the mold.
And the same thing goes for the small independent companies too. I mean, if there's two guys in a basement and they're just cranking out some metal miniatures, whether those are pewter or actually lead, it's still a viable option. I mean, we kind of avoid using lead in general because of the fear of toxicity and little kids sticking it in their mouths. But if you are marketing your thing for adults, then there you
go. Exactly. And actually, I'm going to have to reiterate the current audience reaction of 10,000 for the plastic molds. That seems pretty steep there. That was I'm going to be honest, that was a very surprising statistic there.
It's something that I wish wasn't true. That's actually the main reason why we had to do a Kickstarter to pay for new production, was because to turn around and say, I want to make these new figures. Here, Ed, give me $30,000 and I can put 4 figures on a mold. And he just, I mean, we don't pay that much for the original greens. I don't pay $30,000 to produce 5,000 copies of 4 different figures, even in metal, as expensive as metal is. So why would we invest $30,000 in a mold? And $10,000 is reasonable. We get a really good price when we get a figure mold for $10 grand. But they do go up in complexity, and they go up very, very fast. If you're interested in a highly lucrative career, become a machinist who specializes in making molds for plastic injection molding, because I swear those people have got to be making bank like crazy.
Now, Brian, you said 4 miniatures for one of those plastic molds. Is that typical?
It is. Well, it is on where we're going. I've seen some of our molds, like the molds that have the skeletons and things like that. We can get 8 figures on a mold because they're very small. They don't stretch out very many directions off of their base. They're pretty much just a stick. But when you get a more dynamic figure, we've got a Minotaur and a Bugbear, and I think the Minotaur, the Bugbear, and there's one other figure that shares that mold. So that mold only has those 3 figures on it because they're fairly large. The Purple Worm that we've got, I think there's only 4 figures or 3 figures on that mold because the worm takes up 2 spaces. So a mold only has so many square inches available to it, and you've got to figure out how to put that silhouette and shape as many figures as you can, and the walls still be thick enough. We're talking the machine we're going to get is a 150-ton machine, and that doesn't mean that the machine weighs 150 tons. It means that the hydraulic system is pressing 150 tons of pressure behind the plastic, forcing the plastic into the mold. So it's got to be a steel mold that's got fairly thick walls, and it's very stable, and it's one of the reasons why it's so expensive.
Now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
On YouTube, you can find videos of these molds in the machines going all over the place. Just look for plastic injection machines, and you'll see these molds are not something you can just walk up to with a chisel and carve out. This is, a 1 foot by 1 foot cube of solid steel.
And by comparison, one of the rubber molds for a pewter miniature is about, what, 18 inches across?
Between 9 and 12 inches.
Okay, yeah. You can usually put about around 10 human-sized miniatures on that at least?
Yes.
Yeah, so the per unit that you just per time is vastly different.
Well, the plastic injection molding machine we're looking at can produce 1 press of the mold every 13 seconds. So you get about 5 presses a minute, which gives you about 20 figures a minute. My spin casters, they can run a new mold roughly every 45 seconds to a minute and get about 12 figures a minute. So it's very similar over the course of an 8-hour day, a very similar number of output, even though there's far fewer pieces on one plastic mold.
Interesting. And Sean, you did answer or pose the question I was wanting to ask there myself, so thank you for that. In regards to the mold question here in particular, I do have another question from the audience. In that event, is the mold price a reflection of the details of the figure, or is it related to the materials and their melting points, etc.?
I think the mold price is relevant to the steel that's used in the mold, the technician who has to make the mold and their training. I know we talked about hiring a guy. We were like, well, we could get the mold cost to be practically nothing if we just bought blank molds and hired a technician. And then we realized that a mold making technician makes about $250,000 a year, and I think I don't make anywhere even remotely close to that.
I'm in the wrong business. Wow.
Yeah, right. So you got to pay that guy's salary, and then there's all the equipment. They're not carved out of the solid steel molds. I understand that it's an electron burning process, and I have to admit that I'm not super familiar with it. But basically, they take what amount to 2 pins and run an electrical current between them, and more or less jam that into the steel. And as the electrons flow from one pin to the other, it steals a molecule of steel with it, and eventually carves out a space. So it's not a simple process. It's not something that you can do in your backyard. Whereas you can make a vulcanized rubber mold in your garage if you've got the equipment. This is a highly specialized, requires a lot of training and a lot of skill, and I think that's more where the cost is coming from. And in theory, the cost would come down as the technology becomes more and more prevalent.
Now, do you see a point in the future where the prices of the plastic molds might decrease in time? Do you think that this technology might become so widespread that it might come to the point of being comparable in price to the original rubber molds? Or is there going to be a separate divide between the two for the immediate future?
I would certainly say for short term, even in the next 10 years, you're probably not going to see the price of the molds come down all that much, because everything is plastic molded these days. Your phone is plastic molded, your webcam shell, your computer keyboard. Everything I see when I look in my room around me is got a plastic component somewhere that's plastic injection molded. And so I think this technology is everywhere. It is ubiquitous, but at the same time, it's still got those same basic needs. It's still got this very expensive steel box. It's still got these highly specialized equipment that creates the mold, and it's still got the highly trained technicians that you have to create the mold without, I presume, blowing yourself up or summoning Godzilla or something like that.
Okay. I do also have another question from the audience asking why aren't there do-it-yourself molds for plaster miniatures, plaster of Paris, along those lines.
Sort of. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
So I use molds from like Hearst Arts, who he has created these molds that you can pour dental plaster into or plaster of Paris to make bricks to build your own terrain with. The problem with that, the main drawback to that is that it's a gravity-fed system where it's an open-faced mold and you pour the stuff on top of it and then it settles in and hardens up and then you just pop it out. For a miniature that is a 3D unit, it's going to have stuff on both sides. You would actually have to have a two-part mold where you pour stuff into the bottom and stuff into the top, or you have two pieces that go together. And it's not easy to do that even for something that's as regular and uniform shaped as like a brick or a piece of dungeon wall. The idea of doing that for a human-like miniature that's going to have skinny little arms and a sword, there's just so much opportunity for breakage. I mean, even with the Hearst Arts molds, you can have a skinny piece. Like he has one that has like a Gothic graveyard set, and there's a little metal grate for like the front of your graveyard. And he says, you really need to cast this in resin because you can't cast it in plaster and not expect it to break. So for miniatures, it's just going to be that same problem. Now, I remember in like Dragon Magazine back in the 80s, there were companies that sold rubber molds for casting your own cured miniatures. My friend Jason had one, and you just had to go and buy some lead and a little smelting cup, and you heat it up, and you could pour it in there and spin it around, and it wasn't the best, but it was, theoretically cheaper than actually buying miniatures from somewhere else. But it's not as easy to do that yourself as it is to, say, draw a picture of a miniature and put it on a cardstock.
So one of our employees, and I won't say the name to protect her, has a crucible at home and would on occasion create her own pieces. She would sculpt them herself, so we're not getting into the wretchedly horrible area of copyright violation and duplicating someone else's figures. But she would sculpt them herself. She would go to Hobby Lobby, and they've got this castable or moldable resin that you use. I say moldable. You use it to make molds. And she would press her figures, and she would get Reaper figures and melt them down in her crucible and pour them into her molds. And you could totally do that even with the tin if you have a burner hot enough and a crucible and the safety equipment necessary. And there's no reason that you couldn't use pourable resins in the same mold, and if you know how, plasters and things like that. Really, the big issue with why that kind of home casting isn't more common is, one, it takes up a lot of room, but two, where are you going to get the pattern from which you're producing your figure? Are you going to sculpt that yourself? Do you have that level of skill, or are you going to commission an artist? Because our sculptors, this is their job. This is what they do for a living. So they expect to get paid what they need as a living wage for it. So, you're still going to end up paying a lot of money for that piece. What a miniatures production company like Reaper or Paizo with their plastic minis, or WotC when they used to do miniatures, what we're doing is we're paying the sculptor their hundreds of dollars for one figure, and then we can amortize that hundreds of dollars over the life of several thousand copies of that figure, so that really it's added 1 penny. I pay my artist $500 for a green, and that adds 1 penny to the cost of the final figure because I'm going to produce 5,000 copies.
Very interesting. And speaking of the Pathfinder line, how has that line of miniatures been going? I know the iconic characters were produced in miniature form. It did seem like the goblins were also put out, if I remember correctly here.
We have released 2 sets. One of them is the set of the 4 Iconics, and that was very popular. And then we have the initial Heroes and Monsters set that has a mix of some original designs that were repurposed by WizKids that I think they were going to use for Mage Knight or something, and we kind of fiddled with those and made them more Pathfinder-y, and then a lot of unique things that are actually based on Pathfinder art, and that set has done really well. Then the second full set is Rise of the Rune Lords, which it's pretty crazy. I mean, there are some gargantuan miniatures in there, and they look amazing, and people are loving it. And we're already releasing previews of the next set. I mean, it's doing well. So I don't have exact numbers, but Eric seems very happy whenever he talks about the miniatures.
Okay. I know there's some great stuff in there as well.
And it's funny because like the Heroes and Monsters set had a bunch of goblin miniatures, and they're basically very similar to the sculpts that it's based on the same art that Reaper used for the pewter ones, and I have all the Reaper pewter miniatures, and I painted them up, and my wife Jody paints as well, and so she painted hers up, and I'm like, oh, these are great, they're hand painted, they look awesome. And then the Heroes and Monsters set comes out, and they've got this set of goblin pre-painted miniatures, and I'm like, oh, these are as good as what I was doing. I spent 20 hours on painting these goblins. Okay, well, I guess I have some plastic ones too. I mean, they look great. Here's the thing: like, if you really like to paint miniatures, you're going to paint miniatures anyway. And I love to paint miniatures. So just because I have some easy pre-painted miniatures that are done, doesn't mean I'm going to stop painting. And I can look at these miniatures and say, okay, they use it's a series of steps where they have kind of like masks that they apply so they can just spray paint on these miniatures. So if you want to have details on the side of a character's cloak, they'll have like a little stencil that has these tiny little cutouts. They just place that up against the miniature and they spray another layer of paint on it. And this technique is really good for that. It's just very discrete colors, but it's not quite as good at doing things like blending and just smooth transitions and stuff. So like a lot of the stuff you'll see for people doing painting competitions where it's like, wow, this cloak starts as one color and it blends all the way down to this other color and it looks like, all ephemeral and beautiful and things like that. That's not where the technology is at for the pre-painted yet. So you're still going to see people wanting to do the self-painted because it's just a different look. But if you're a person who's like, I've got two thumbs and I can't paint, or I don't have time to paint, or I don't want to, deal with that sort of thing, and I just need 10 miniatures for my desk, for my tabletop, pre-painted's a way that so many people are. I mean, it's like people like to go see movies in the theater versus seeing movies at home on DVD. It's just a matter of what's more convenient for the customer, and there's enough money out there that people are finding stuff that they like either way.
And we at Reaper have been just ridiculously impressed with how you guys have been able to push the envelope on the quality of paint jobs. And we've been watching pre-painted miniatures since they first came out, going, okay, is this going to destroy our company? And then when we've come to find out, no, it isn't. It's going to help us because it gets more people interested in miniatures. And while the customer who gets interested in miniatures because of a pre-paint might never buy a Reaper Mini, they still start looking at miniatures and they start showing miniatures to their friends, and it does help. Everybody in the industry does better when something in the industry is very exciting. But over the last when did WizKids launch? 96, 97 with Mage Knight, somewhere in that area. But what they've been able to do in the last 15 or so years with the quality of the paint job has just been incredibly impressive, and we've just been watching that. Just in awe of, wow, you can mass produce this, and we're really excited by that. When we launched our Legendary Encounters line, we made sure that we were getting really good top-notch pre-paints as far as the quality of the paint job, and so many of our fans turned around and said, well, we want these unpainted, and we were like, what? We have unpainted miniatures. They're called Dark Heaven Legends. You go buy those now, and they go, well, yeah, but we want the plastic ones unpainted. And when we launched Bones, the response to that, we launched it in March, and it became 1/3 of our sales within 6 weeks, and that was just incredible. Legendary Encounters, I think, was never higher than 10% of our sales. So for Bones to do 3 times as well with half as many products in the line, just that sent us a message, And
like Brian was saying, like if you have someone who picks up a pre-painted miniature and then they play a different character, and they're like, oh, I really wish that this character had a shield. That makes them think about, well, how can I add a shield to this character? Where can I get shields for this character? Oh, I want him to have a red cloak instead of a blue cloak. And it gets people thinking about all the stuff that miniatures painters do. Even though they're working with pre-painted plastic, that doesn't mean they can't customize their miniatures and just add and subtract things. I mean, it's just the entire industry looks like it's pewter versus pre-painted plastic versus bones versus whatever. But in the same way that the gaming industry really is just a bunch of people who like gaming, and while you can draw fine lines of like, oh, I like 4th edition, I like 3rd edition, I like Pathfinder, I like GURPS, it's really just people who like to game. So the miniatures industry is the same way. It's like people who like miniatures. Whatever it is, there's a lot of overlap in them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it does seem that the appeal of having a custom-made painted character is never really ever going to go away. So it doesn't seem that the original style of mini is going to ever go out of style, essentially. To start wrapping up the panel here, I do have a couple of just kind of funsies questions. Do you guys have any miniatures, like specific miniature lines, or even like a favorite specific miniature that you have?
I know my wife still has the first miniature she ever painted, the one I was telling you about, the Ralpartha Thief. We have it in her glass display case, and every now and then she teaches. She has a part-time professionally works as a miniatures painter, and teaches occasionally painting classes at ReaperCon when we have a space available. And she'll trot that out along with her best example. Here's the one I won the award with. Oh, and here's the first one I ever did. So if you ever look at your stuff and you think it's crap, trust me, I did worse. And that's really cool. But I think probably the jewel of my collection is I tried my hand at sculpting once, and it didn't go over super well. It was okay. But I convinced our mold making team to put it on mold for me. And somebody snuck a copy of that figure. Once it was on mold, of course, they made it. Somebody snuck a copy of that figure to Derek Schubert, who's one of the greatest painters in the country, if not the greatest painter in the country right now. And he painted my miniature for me, the one I sculpted. And that, I think, is absolutely the pinnacle crown jewel of my collection. I have a Derek Schubert paint job on a miniature sculpted by me. And he made it look like really good. Like you look at his and you go, hey, why isn't that in production? And then you look at the original sculpt and you can see all the defects that he somehow magically painted away. So,
that is awesome.
For me, this is going to sound like I'm sucking up, but Reaper has such a wide variety of minis, and most of what you need for a miniature is something that looks like a character, whether it's a PC or NPC. And I really love that you can just go to their site and be like, I need a halfling rogue with a hammer, and you can search for that, and they'll pop up, oh, here's 5 different ones. And if not, then if they don't have the exact miniature you're looking for, it's like, oh, here, look through the bones. Here's a bunch of hammer sets. Here's a bunch of halflings, whatever. It's all there. So many of the first miniatures I was painting were actually Reaper minis. And this is before I started actually going to the Reaper site. So I was buying them from somebody else off of eBay. And someone else at Wizards of the Coast was like, you can get those for like the normal price if you just go to Reaper's website. And so I started buying them from Reaper. But like the first big book that I was working on as kind of a standalone thing for Wizards of the Coast was Ghostwalk. And I was running a long playtest of the campaign. It's something I wrote with Monty Cook. And I did miniatures for all the PCs in the game. And I think every single one of those PCs is a Reaper miniature. And they're all up on my website. I just took pictures of them and just for kind of showing my progress as I went along. And just like Brian's wife, Shannon, I have a picture of the 2 miniatures that are the first miniatures I ever painted. They're up on my website. They are they're actually granted... No, they're actually from the old TSR Wizards and Illusionists set. And
oh, wow.
They look awful. I was using enamel paints, which of course take an hour to dry, and so I painted like the Wizard's robe yellow, and I wanted to make a blue stripe along the edge, but it was still wet, so it turned out kind of green, and I didn't prime them, and I think I was using some fluorescent craft paints as well, so like the Illusionist is holding this like fluorescent pink crystal ball, and they just look so bad, and it's hilarious. And I'd forgotten about these miniatures. I moved out 20 years ago, and my mom was cleaning some stuff out of the closet, and she's like, oh, I found these old miniatures of yours, and I hadn't seen them in 15 years. I'm like, these are so awful, it's hilarious. So I had to show people, it's like, look, you know what? This is the first miniature I ever painted, and then I took a picture of the second miniature I ever painted, which was the Wizards of the Coast 25th Anniversary Barbarian for TSR. He's got like this axe above his shoulder, like this. And the difference between the first miniatures I ever painted and the second miniature I ever painted, where actually someone was telling me, okay, this is what a wash is, this is what a dry brush is, this is how much paint to put on your paintbrush. It's such a big difference. And so anytime someone gets disheartened about painting miniatures, and I've done painting workshops for speed painting at ReaperCon, I've done them at NorwestCon and PaizoCon, and just sitting somebody down with their very first miniature and saying, okay, this is how you do the technique. And when they're done, after an hour of working on a miniature, like, oh, that's not bad. And their second miniature is even better, and the third miniature is even better after that. It's just really neat to see the progression of how people skill using just 2 or 3 different techniques to make it work.
You said you didn't want to sound like you were sucking up, and that just reminded me of I guess it was about 2 years ago when I came up to the Paizo shop to see where you guys, made all the books and did all the magic. And Sean's giving me a tour through the office. And I swear everybody that day went, Reaper's going to be here. Everybody get your Reaper minis out and put them on your desk. Because every office I walked into, there were just Reaper minis and just all over the place. And I thought, is this a setup? And everybody was like, oh, I'm sorry, my desk is such a mess. No, it turns out they're just as big gamer geeks and nerds as the rest of us. Sean's never been to my home, but if he did, I'm sure he'd think that I set it up to just put all this Paizo stuff on my bookshelves and just to impress him. But no, it's really all there, So it's kind of cool how everybody in the industry is just a big nerd, and we all have the same stuff.
Exactly. Let's see. One last question to wrap up here, though I do have to admit I probably spent a little bit more time on that figure finder than I probably should, but I love you guys. Let's see. Is there any style of paints, any particular paint sets that you guys particularly use or would recommend?
Well, obviously, I recommend the Reaper Master Series and Master Series High Density. Vallejo paints are also very good. They use some different techniques to make their paints than we use to make ours. So the techniques that you use to paint with a Vallejo paint and the technique that you might use with a Reaper miniature might be a little bit different. You might need a little less of some kinds of additives and a little more of others and things like that. But Vallejo makes a very good paint. I've heard really good things about Privateer Press's P3, but I've never had any personal experience with that. And I haven't used Citadel paint since the 90s, so I couldn't tell you what those are like anymore. But those, as I understand it, those 4 names are pretty much the top 4 that most people bandy about, unless I'm missing something.
And not to sound like I'm sucking up again, but all I use nowadays are Reaper paints. When I first started painting, I just bought some Citadel paints because the people around me were into Games Workshop stuff. And then when I started posting photos of my minis on my website, Ron at Reaper is like, I don't want you using Citadel paints anymore. So he sent me a complete set of the Reaper paints at the time. And that's what I've been using since then. So when a color runs out, I replace it. And now they've got the different style bottle, and Jody got a complete set of the line as of early last year. So she's really pleased with those, and so she's giving a big thumbs up to the Reaper paints as well. I mean, you guys know what you're doing, so keep up the good work.
And I'd like to go ahead and here's a secret that not everybody in the industry knows. Most people are familiar with Wayne Reynolds. He does the cover art for the gorgeous Paizo hardback books and a lot of the interior arts and spreads as well. And all of those paintings are hand-painted. He does some digital touch-ups occasionally, but they are all hand-painted. And the paint he uses to paint those is Reaper paint. So, and we have to ship it to him. Every year we send him a new box of Reaper paints for whatever he's used up. So.
Okay, that is something I did not know. That is pretty awesome.
I think most people didn't know that. So, yeah.
All right. Well, it does look like we have gone a bit over time, so I'm supposing if there's any parting advice or last thoughts you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, obviously the people listening to this are probably already miniatures fans, but so it's not like we need to convince them to try painting miniatures or using miniatures. But just like every industry, I think, has an element of doom and gloom, and there have been people who have been predicting the end of the RPG industry since around 1980, and here we are still, chugging along very nicely. So just be open to checking out new miniatures and new technologies for miniatures, and it's just have fun and don't let people crap on your hobby.
And remember that there's more to miniatures than just playing your games. The painting hobby, the modifying and converting hobby, the tabletop war games hobby. There's so much you can do with this. It's not just something to support one product. We don't just make miniatures so that you can play Pathfinder, although we do make miniatures so you can play Pathfinder. We don't just make miniatures so you can paint them, although we do make miniatures so you can paint them, and so on and so forth. So just as he said, be open to new technologies. Be open to new ways to use the figures and new things that you can do with them.
Yeah, I really like to see somebody taking like their miniatures, painting them up, and using them to make a webcomic or a graphic novel or something like that. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Look up 28mm theater. Somebody's already doing it.
Well, cool. I work at that.
Yeah, she uses Reaper Minis. That's how I know about it. She posts her comics up on our website for us to see. So.
Oh, gotta say, awesome. Okay, and it does look like we are pretty much ran out of time here. I do believe we got our full hour allotment in. So I would like to thank both Sean and Brian here. Thank you for this panel. It was a great time, and I gotta say, I've learned quite a bit about the miniature industry, a lot more than I knew coming in. So I do thank you for all the information you've shared with us tonight.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Also, I want to say that the reflection of your monitor on your glasses makes it look like you have bright, tiny eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have technology to fix that quite yet.
Some live photoshopping.
Yes, there we go.
Well, thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Definitely. Sorry about the technical issues earlier, but I do definitely thank you for coming on.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. So this is going to conclude the end of our broadcasting day for the AetherCon discussion panels. We will be back on at about 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we will continue through 8 p.m. tomorrow as well. I do thank you for attending all of our events today and all of our discussion panels. I do thank all of our panelists today, and I would like to wish you all a very good day and night, depending on your time zone. It's kind of varied all over the place with AetherCon, so thank you for attending, and have a good night.